And if everything goes well, if the hen is sufficiently impressed with the male, then she's gonna lay almost always 4 eggs on the ground. Almost always 4 eggs. Very, very consistent. And for a game bird, that's not very many eggs. Because as you know, turkeys, pheasants, quail, grouse, they're going to lay 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, eggs, and then have a fairly small percentage of those survive to adulthood in the fall. Whereas a woodcock, they have very good survival rates of their chicks. And part of that is probably because they will help feed their chicks. Every so often someone will slip in an extra egg there, but it's almost always 4. They will feed their chicks because you can't be born with a 3-inch bill because that doesn't work very well in the egg. So chicks are born with a very short bill that they can't probe with, but it grows very quickly, so the adult will pick earthworms up and they'll shove them down the young's throat. And that's got to help them because grouse and other gallinaceous birds, they don't do that. They take the chicks to where there's food and then they let the chicks fend for themselves. And they do know how to do that, but it seems to me that that's the advantage that a woodcock has, only having 4 eggs. They're just good at getting their young to adulthood. And then they've got the whole summer to fatten up and become good flyers so that they can migrate. I mentioned the probing for earthworms. Moist soils, so rocky, dry, sandy soils are not going to be so great. But moist, fertile soils that have a lot of earthworms and hopefully the right kind of cover, and that's always the big but, or the big I hope, that's going to be where you're going to find woodcock. And these photos are by Tim Flanagan. He's got all sorts of photos like this that are just amazing. This particular bird, he's got other photos of it. It has a piece of grass sticking up its nose. It's right up its nostril. It's about that long. And he has a side view of it. It's really, really a pretty neat picture. But earthworms are key. They do eat some other stuff, but by and large, they eat earthworms. Woodcock don't have a crop or a gizzard because a crop and a gizzard are for storage and grinding after swallowing. And most other birds have that. Woodcock do not because they eat worms. They don't need to squish them up and grind them. They're already squishy and soft. So they have an extra long digestive system to take care of that worm. This is kind of your classic shrubland woodcock habitat. It doesn't necessarily have to be any particular species. It's the structure that really is important. It's a high stem density without a whole lot on the ground where a woodcock can walk and probe and nest and the little chicks can move around, but with good overhead protection. This is one of my best singing areas in a spot in central Pennsylvania that I survey. It's an old field. It actually had a ton of exotics in it, and we removed it all, autumn olive, and now it's almost all natives. But that doesn't matter. They were there with the autumn olive anyway. This is Bald Eagle State Park, right north of State College. Yeah. And we're doing a huge woodcock project there, but we did nothing more than take small equipment in here with mowers and whatnot and manipulate this. But there's a lot of space between these shrubs, but they're clumpy enough that woodcock really, really like this habitat. And there's a mowed trail right through the middle of it, and that's what they use for their singing grounds. And also some of the gaps in between the shrubs. So this is a perfect type of habitat that you're looking for. And it's more the structure. You don't need to worry so much about the species.
How close will the males sing together? Are they territorial? If you have a long strip mowed next to
that's a good question. I don't know what the exact spacing is, but they won't, if let's say this was the opening right here, you wouldn't find 2 of them in this opening. You're going to find them. Yeah, you're going to need to space them out. And what they've found is that, if you keep adding singing grounds, you'll keep adding males for quite a while until you kind of max out on it. So this is an area that's just absolutely polluted with woodcock in March and April. The other thing is very young forest cover. This happens to be aspen, but you can get a very similar response to this from sweet gum, which you do have here in the, I call it New Jersey aspen because there's a ton of it in New Jersey as well. And if you cut it, it'll grow back an awful lot like aspen. And so that may be something that's very handy if you want to create these young forest early successional type habitats because you have some sweet gum and it's not good for much anything else. And you're going to see a picture in, I think, Bob's presentation of sweet gum that's too old and could now be managed and knocked back into. And if I had thought of it, I have pictures of sweet gum too that I could have put in this presentation. I just didn't think of it. So sweet gum will work, but anything that provides this structure is going to work too. After a while, these young forest habitats are going to get too old, and I don't know what the trigger is for woodcock, whether it's how much sunlight's getting in or whatever, but then they'll stop using them. But a lot depends on what you've got in the understory when woodcock will stop using them. If there's very little in the understory, the trees are starting to get big, then they'll stop sooner. This particular cover, by my eye, would have been too old for woodcock, but it had a lot of fern and blackberry still in it, and there was still a lot of woodcock in it. And that's my ex-dog pointing a woodcock there in that cover. This is a cover. This is kind of the same thing. This is a cover where the little trees are now too big, but it's full of dogwood in the understory. And the other thing I want to point out about this picture is that this was an open field of nothing but grass, and this cover was created completely by planting trees and shrubs. It's rare to get something to look that good by planting. Now, some of the shrubs came up and volunteered, and some of the aspen came up and then volunteered, so it really thickened it up. But this was done by the Corps of Engineers in Pennsylvania in an open field. They planted aspen, and they underplanted the aspen with dogwood, and it turned into a beautiful woodcock cover. Unfortunately, everyone and their brother knows about it, so it gets pounded pretty good. It's not that big of a patch, but it shows you what you can do. If you give it a go. And I don't know if deer are an issue down here, but that could be the problem with plantings. And I'm sure some of the locals can tell you a lot more about that. From what I've seen, you have plenty of deer down here. Other habitats just come in naturally. If you have an old agricultural field like this and you give it time, some good things are going to happen. Trees are going to grow. Shrubs are going to grow. Many things are going to move in, but that takes time. And then what you want to do is you want to try and keep it from becoming a forest at that point. So there's this balancing act. This is alder. I don't know that you have any alder on the Eastern Shore, do you? Eastern Shore? I don't know. A little bit. It's an easy species to manage. You can cut it and regenerate it like other types of trees and shrubs, but it tends to be associated with moist soils almost all the time. And we worked at Indian Springs with the state guys over there a few years ago to manage some alder with some equipment. And so there are some opportunities in other parts of Maryland to manipulate alder for the purpose of the woodcock. This is the Canaan Valley. This is about a 72-acre patch of alder on private property right in the middle of the refuge, where the landowner said, yeah, I've got all this old alder that's all the same age. Why don't you guys come and cut it down for us? So we're doing that. We're in the middle of doing that and working with the state and the feds and the landowner and the Rough Grouse Society, and I'm sort of in charge of the project. And we're cutting in strips and regenerating that habitat. It looks fantastic. Now, beavers used to create a heck of a lot of woodcock habitat, not so much anymore. The areas along riparian areas, river corridors, streams, which have a lot of in the east, can be great places for woodcock because of the soil fertility, and it tends to be moist. We tend to try and stay away from those areas from a management standpoint, which is kind of too bad because those are really great places for wildlife, and sometimes it would be really advantageous to be able to do a little bit more work on in those sort of sensitive areas, if nothing else by hand. Woodcock roost in big open, kind of an open field, short grass fields. On the Eastern Shore of Maryland in particular, I don't think you have any shortage of open fields. I think you probably have plenty of places for woodcock to roost. It's probably more the diurnal, the daily habitat, the thick stuff that you've got a shortage of over here. But if you happen to have a vast expanse of shrubs and no big openings, you can create a 2, 3, 4, or 5 acre place for them to roost. If this area here was surrounded by good woodcock habitat, your birds would just be roosting here in these fields. Woodcock have probably been more impacted by development than a species like grouse. They will use fairly isolated patches of habitat because woodcock fly around on a daily basis and use different habitats. A grouse, for example, doesn't do that. So you can find woodcock in a patch in this fairly suburban landscape using an old field. This was an old field in State College where I lived that was beautiful woodcock habitat, and now it's houses because it was the perfect place to build houses. And it was a place where grouse probably hadn't been for 100 years, but woodcock was still using it quite heavily, and then they built on it. So woodcock probably are impacted more by development than other species because they do have that ability to kind of focus in and find isolated habitats because they do fly around. When an old field or a young forest becomes an older forest, we'll take that and we'll turn it back into a young forest or an old field. This is also Bald Eagle State Park, where the old farm fields had turned into woodlands, and we brought in the heavy artillery and we knocked it back to old field. It's worked fantastically well. We've done a lot of dog and pony shows, including with a bunch of people from Maryland. Brought them up there, showed them what we're doing. It has cost some money, but we have got the big equipment in there and whacked away, and it's worked pretty well. We have some smaller equipment where we can be more surgical. You can rent this stuff from Caterpillar and other manufacturers. If you've got some fairly heavy-duty management you want to do, and it's more than a chainsaw and your back can handle, they do have some of these handy-dandy implements you can put on a Caterpillar and go in there and do it yourself. And it's very easy to operate this equipment. And if you know somebody who's familiar with equipment, they can run it too. But we've bought 3 of these pieces right here. We've got all sorts of different implements to put on them. And man, for woodcock management, where a lot of it is non-commercial, where you're just out there hacking and doing whatnot, this works really well. For my taste, the best way to create a lot of woodcock habitat, a lot of young forest habitat in a hurry, is through a commercial timber sale. That's the best way to take a big bite. Pays for itself, hopefully more than that, and a lot of times it does. And this was 60. This is in let's see, 85 acre cut where we made $120-some thousand, and then we got the habitat. So if you're really looking at a big landscape with a lot of forest and you want to create some woodcock habitat, the commercial timber sale is the way to go. There's no question about it. You don't have to cut all the trees. That last slide, that could be pine. A pine plantation that you thinned out. You put enough sunlight on the ground to create that early successional habitat. Woodcock, this few trees in the overstory, which is only a handful per acre, isn't going to bother them at all, as long as that structure is underneath there. So this is really a good way to go. And we sometimes forget about this because we're always talking about old fields and manipulating this little thing and that little thing. But what we need is a lot more woodcock habitat, not a little bit more woodcock habitat. And, a clear cut is fine too. If that's what the prescription is, great. We'll take it. High stem density woodcock habitat. So if you're a landowner and you're interested in this stuff, get started, because we need you now. You guys and girls, you own most of the landscape. You own most of the forest. You own much of the potential habitat. So sure, we love to put it on public land so we can hunt it and do all that kind of stuff, but if we're really going to make a difference, it's going to come through partnerships with private landowners. And the Rough Grouse Society, the first step is get some literature in your hands so you can study up, do stuff like this. This is wonderful. We will come out to your property, and I've done this dozens and dozens of times. Come out to your property, walk the property, talk about what your options are. We'll say, this is good for this will be good for that. You've got this going for you. Get out there and find out in the next couple months if you've got singing woodcock on your property. That's an easy thing to do at dusk every night. Take a cup of coffee or something stronger and walk out there and listen. That's nut. We will find you. We don't write management plans because our regions are so big as individuals. We don't write management plans, and we don't often come out and do the work ourselves unless you contract with us to do that, which we have done. But we will find the people that you need to help you. Now, fortunately, most of those people are in this room. We've got state folks, we've got the NRCS folks. They are here, and they are the types of people we would normally hook you up with if we were just working one-on-one with you. But we're here. Phone, just, if it were me, you'd call me up, we'd set a date, I'd come to your property, and we'd take a walk, and we'd talk about management. So I think we're holding questions. Mac, you and Bob switch places, so now I'm all confused.